Oh, good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to another show. G'day, George. Do you know what I'm laughing at?
The comments, probably.
Yeah. Before we even start, Rose got in there. The Dark Lord, Dead Man Walking, and the eye candy right-wing clickbait. What a show coming up next on BHN. And that's because Ro is laughing. I'll show you. I'm sure people have seen it, but in case you haven't, is laughing at our thumbnail. The Dark Lord, Dead Man Walking, and that's Chantelle Baker when Chantelle was trying to be, I guess, a fashionista and working. No disrespect. I mean, it's a path for people. And I think it was called ZM's New Zealand Ladies or something. She was involved with that. So yeah. I used it because, as you can see, we have 3 profile pictures, and it was a narrow one on her. Sometimes when it's a close up of the face, it's a bit hard to fit in that sort of thing. So that's the only reason. Hi, George.
Hey, how's it going?
Man. It's going good.
It's been a week, isn't it?
Has been a week. Been very busy on the old interweb here in BHN. Of course, Friday night, still getting some kind of flow on from our conversation with Paula Penfold. I think what I hadn't, and also a big congratulations to Paula, won 2 massive awards at the Voyager Media Awards on Saturday night. I did feed the trolls just a little bit by congratulating her on the YouTube clip. And then pin that comment to the top, especially with all the comments that are like, oh, look, 3 has-beens and a nobody. And I'm like, well, actually, let's be fair. 2 has-beens, well, 2 nobodies, and Paula Penfold, a multi-award winning journalist and respected person in the journalistic field. So huge congratulations to her. And there's still flow on from that. I didn't realize at the time, but I think we were the only guys to actually talk to Paula outside of what she was doing to stuff until RNZ. I think RNZ had her for Media Watch on Sunday morning. So actually, it was a great privilege and a great lot of fun to have her. So yeah, so there's been a fair bit of flow on from that through the weekend. And if you follow us on the YouTube channel, then there's been some clips and stuff uploaded today. And actually, what I've done, because it was a good episode, is I actually also kind of mirrored it over to my DOC podcast page as well. So I've actually put it out through my podcast feed as well as this, because it's just good content, George. It's just good content.
Yeah, the Friday nights definitely afford time for those, I guess, big sort of hour-long special things that we do.
Yeah. And if people are wondering, if you're having a look at the bottom of the screen right now, if you're watching what we're doing, then this also becomes a daily audio podcast, and you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're on the MediaWorks platform Rover, and we're on Spotify. And all you need to do is Google #BHN, or just search Big Hairy News. Either one of those things, we pop up. I don't think we got mentioned in Media Watch. Did we get mentioned in Media Watch? Simon says congratulations for getting mentioned on Media Watch this weekend. I don't think we did. I'll check that though. If we did, yes. And if we didn't, expected. What about you, George? You've been good. I haven't seen you for a week. Life's going well. Congratulations to your partner right here. There was a graduation in the weekend.
Yeah, partner graduated. That was all fun. You know, it's all right to partake in the evil empire ceremonies sometimes. Do a bit of clapping. And yeah, just the normal sort of things. Nothing special, but except for the graduation, obviously. I'm going to do mine in December. My grandmother is very looking forward to it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Grandmother's in Christchurch, is that right?
Yeah.
Come down.
So, yeah.
Oh, very good. Oh, look, Simon's updating. They referred to us as the Dunedin Pace podcast. Of course the fuckers did. Mention our name, you bastards. Anyway. Hey, so tonight's show, we've got a bunch going on tonight, and as per usual, there's 3 or 4 or 5 things we may talk about. We'll probably end up talking about 3 of them. We do want to reference a couple of things that sort of are sparked from Friday night's conversation with multi-award winning journalist Paula Penfold. And it also has to do with the upcoming protest that's happening tomorrow in Wellington. I wonder if it's going to be a massive flop. In other words, there's always build up with thousands of people will be there. Remember, they tried to do that protest after the Wellington protest shut down. They were all going to meet like in a couple of bays away in Wellington, and like no one turned up. So it'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. Also, and on top of that, Chantelle Baker, who I actually, to be honest, really knew nothing about until last week. some little noises I'd heard. I'd never seen any of her stuff until last week, but she's lost her social medias and stuff over the weekend, and she's blaming stuff for that. And ironically, it was Sean Plunkett who straightened her out and told her that she was wrong with that. We might have a look at that. There's Gaurav Sharma and his ongoing he said, because he's saying one thing and everybody else is saying something else, and more. So we'll see how we go through the night. As you look, they're still talking about it. Mention us as big hair news. Makes us sound like a 60s hairdresser. That's defamation. Well, actually, but mind you, I was just saying to George, to be honest, tomorrow I'm going to go get it all taken off. So actually, maybe that's accurate. Maybe that's accurate news. Because I haven't had a haircut since pre-Omicron, which I just worked out. I think means I haven't had a haircut since January. So maybe big hair news is absolutely 100% fair. Maybe they've seen it. I have to go listen. I think that's hilarious. If we got mentioned as big hair news, I'm going to use that now as a tagline. That's fantastic. Okay, guys, let's get into the conversation. One of the things we are going to look at tonight is the protest that's going on tomorrow. I want to give you a bit of a heads up as to what it's all about and what we've been told so far. So the first thing we're going to do is let's have a look. This is from the project tonight. They give quite a nice sort of 90-second synopsis of what has happened and what is happening tomorrow. Let's have a look at that, and then we've got a guest coming on, and we'll have a bit of a chat about it.
It's hard to believe that it's only been a few months since this. And now a new procession of protesters is on its way to the capital.
I got to say, watching the news tonight, the grass at Parliament looked really nice and green. I hope they don't cock it up tomorrow. I'm sure they won't, but it was one of the thoughts. I thought how lovely and green that grass looked, but we'll see.
The 3-week-long demonstration at Parliament in February was originally meant to be about COVID-19 vaccine mandates, but soon it was about much, much more than that. In the so-called Freedom Village, anti-mandators could now swap notes with full-blown anti-vaxxers, Trump supporters, the literal tinfoil hat wearers.
So at the more moderate end, there were people who may be vaccinated and just opposed the mandates. And then at the more extreme end, there were people who believed not only was the vaccine harmful, but it was deliberately so.
While that protest was characterised by a lack of focus and leadership, this one is being visibly led by Brian Tamaki. He's in charge of the Freedom and Rights Coalition, and their plan is to hold a mock trial, accusing the government of crimes against humanity. The group says the protest will be peaceful, but some are concerned it could be hijacked.
There's a growing group of people in society who really believe that the government is deliberately causing them harm, and those people may start to believe that acts of violence against the government or against politicians or journalists may be justified because of that.
Authorities in Wellington have learnt from last time and are on high alert. But with the city already dealing with natural threats, will they be stretched too thin to prevent another dumpster fire?
I guess both literal and metaphorical dumpster fire. I want to welcome to the show Laura Drew from Pōneke Anti-Fascist Coalition. Good evening. Hello. Welcome. Kia ora. Haere mai. Good to see you, man.
Kia ora, peeps. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, look, it's an absolute pleasure. Now, when Mr. Tamaki held an event in Auckland, there were counter-protests to that event that seemed to be fairly effective, yeah? And seemed to be fairly fun. There was counter-protests that were going on. Now, we spoke to the counter-protesters from Auckland when that happened. I understand you are someone who is involved with groups who are doing maybe not the same, but a similar counter-protest idea for Brian Tamaki tomorrow. Am I correct in that? And tell us about it.
Similar vibe. And there are people from the Auckland. I'm not sure how involved they are with organising in Auckland, but definitely in Ōtepoti, people who are involved in the organising here. So very aligned. And yeah, I guess we're just going to be standing up and being that visible, not opposition, but like alternative to the politics of hate and fear and violence that we see from the Freedom and Rights Coalition.
Do you have concerns about the protest tomorrow from Brian Tamaki's side and where it could go, or do you think, I said at the start, you were listening, obviously, that it could be a bit of a flat, or is there something we should be concerned about, do you think?
I think regardless of how big it is tomorrow, we should be concerned about the rise of disinformation, of the politics of fear and division. It's dividing our communities. There's people, their politics are based on, like, not based in reality, quite often, and it's hard to speak to that. But yeah, whether or not it tomorrow is a big event for them, the problem is the rise of fascism.
Yeah, it seems a bit different now that I guess there's sort of an organized voice in Brian Tamaki behind the thing. I wonder what was the sort of vibe back when Parliament was getting occupied with the anti-fascist movement in Wellington. How was that sort of approached? Maybe differently to tomorrow might be approached.
Well, I didn't get very involved in any organising around in February, but I guess the difference then was that Omicron was on the rise in Wellington, so people weren't willing to go out and to organise against them. But for every person who's going to be coming along tomorrow, there are hundreds more who want to be there. The opposition to what is going on is incredibly strong. You can see it on so many platforms. I was checking out Reddit today, and people are just posting pictures of Brian being like, "This guy's a complete grifter," and get him out of here. I have no idea what the point I was making just then was.
How big do you think your side of the will actually be? How many are you expecting to turn out for your counter? I mean, I keep hearing counter protest, and yes, it is a counter to the others, but it is just a protest as well, isn't it? It's your protest, your counter protest. How big is it going to be? What numbers are you looking for?
Well, I'm hoping it'll be a dance party, because frankly, I'm not really that keen on a conflict. Yeah, we can only guess. I think the bigger it is, the better it will be, because these people are operating under the kind of the assumption that they are part of the majority, that they say things that no one else will say, and it's not true. They're a very small minority of people, but they amplify their voices. They live in echo chambers online, and I guess the destruction, that the division that they cause, it's fracturing communities. There are people who I love, who have people they love, who will be going along tomorrow, and we don't know how to kind of talk to each other through this kind of disinformation.
Yeah, and in your experience, Laura, has discourse between, I think of counter protests I've been to against, I guess people who I wouldn't necessarily talk to, but instead confront, like the National Front and that sort of thing. But the reason I brought up the occupation of Parliament the other a few months back is because I could imagine myself talking with those people who probably have some of those sort of similar anxieties and concerns about our so-called democracy or whatever that I do. Do you find discourse, can sort of flow, or is it just completely gone?
Well, I think it needs to, because the kind of counterpoint, the antidote to the division that the fear and the disinformation causes is connecting, is bringing people together, and finding those points of commonality. And I guess the difference, a lot of people on the left are very concerned with the rise in inequality and the cost of living crisis and climate justice, but the difference is how you approach that. And I guess rejecting outright Nazis, like if you walk alongside Nazis, if you're willing to work with them, that says so much about you. And I think that those people need to realize that and need to look at who they're working with.
Let me share something with you as well. We had one of Brian Tamaki's underlings from Christchurch in Dunedin in July. And I went along to have a look, and this is my TikTok channel, which is, nobody should go and check it out because it's full of dog photos basically. But you're talking about, the reason I was reminded of this is you're talking about a dance party. Yeah. So there's about 20 or 25 people from what are they called? The Freedom for whatever, the Freedom to be Dickheads Coalition. Is that what it is? And on the other side of the octagon,
we'll be there Friday night. We're having a meeting Friday night.
There is a literal dance party going on with about, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 times the number of people. Yeah.
And then Sunday, I'm going to church.
Playing Chumbawamba.
Please don't hate me for that. I had my convictions. And I have my
and I have to say, you're talking about not wanting to be confrontational. That visual imagery, there didn't need to be any conversation. In fact, what I found from standing over the side, sort of watching, was it was the Destiny Church people that wanted to interact, and all the guys on the other side of the road were having a dance party because they were. I mean, I don't know the exact, but let's say at least 3 times the size. I think more like 5 times the size, and these guys just looked like idiots because they didn't have any. Because they are, and because they lost. You don't have to. When I say lost, to win, there doesn't have to be a confrontation. It's not like a sport where there has to be a 1-0 at the end and a definite thing. It's like, you are insignificant. I'll turn my back on you. We're 5 times the size of you. Well, this is representative of our city. You guys can fuck off. And that was great. That was beautiful. I was very proud of Dunedin on that day.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's a beautiful image. And I think that also on the one side, you have a man yelling and trying to be important. And on the other side, you have fun and inclusion, because they stand for like excluding people, for causing people to fear for their lives, for their existence. And, we're about, having a good time and making sure that people are supported and protected from COVID.
I experienced that as well. I had a really good, when I say good experience, I mean good example of what the opposition is about. So walking back to my car, I had my dog with me, was walking back to my car, and there was a lady and a man in their 50s, kind of looked over to us and kind of gave us they call it the East Coast hello, g'day. And I'm like, oh yeah. And they were like, oh, so, what's this all about? And I'm like, oh, these guys over there and these guys here. And then some kind of comment came out from her about, being forced to vaccine. I was just like, oh yeah. And I said, no, we're fully vaccinated. And she was like, oh, you're one of those. And I'm one of those. I'm one of the ones that wants to look after his own health and the health of around you. I'm one of those. And she looked at me and she said, my daughter died from the vaccine a couple of weeks ago. And I just looked her in the eye and went, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I'm sorry. I do not believe that your daughter died. Couple of reasons. A, I know the stats, but B is like a couple of things. If my child had died 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't be out and about just having a fun time with people and be okay with that. And the second thing is, as soon as I said, I don't believe you, she didn't do anything. Like if I said, oh, my kid died in a car crash last week, and someone said, no, they didn't, I'd be apoplectic. I'd be on them like a bloody what do they say? White on rice, or whatever that saying is. And so it gave me this real understanding that there are probably people who are misinformed and disinformed. There are people who are full, but there are also really nefarious actors that just are full of shit and just completely lie, and just for the sake of getting their point across. And I think that's what I experienced. I mean, I can't be 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that's what I experienced with that lady. And it kind of took me aback a bit that someone can actually just be so blatantly and obviously lying to try and prove a point. Because I guess I always think if you've got the right answer, you don't need to bullshit about it. You just have the right answer. You know what I mean? So it was an experience, at least anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you want to let us know what's happening for you tomorrow? If there's anyone watching in the Wellington area that wants to join in, what's the plan and what do you need to let people know about?
Come on down, 10 a.m. at the cenotaph. That's the weird war statue below Parliament, and bring dancing shoes. It looks like it's going to rain. Bring a jacket. Bring some friends. Yeah. Our plan is just to hang out and have a dance. There'll be some people speaking, meet some people, make some friends, have some good Wellington vibes.
Do you plan to try and get in the way? Or are you where the other guys are you planning to sort of, so not at all, not even but basically be alongside them and ignore them? Is that the plan?
I think be there, they'll have to walk past us, and just be visibly way cooler than them and way funner than them, and try and keep it chill.
Very cool. All right, that's Laura from the Poiniki Anti-Fascist Coalition. Good luck tomorrow. I think we're checking with Cena tomorrow night, so we'll find out how it all ended up going on and what happened. And look, if any of you are there live and you want to find me a text, maybe we can live stream from this end as well, and you guys can show us on your phones what's going on, because we can always do that, do a bit of out and about type conversations as well. Laura, thanks for joining us tonight, mate. That was awesome.
Cool. No worries. Have a good evening.
Cheers, Laura.
You too, man. Appreciate that. So anyway, the conversation tomorrow, Brian Tamaki, as I was saying, doesn't seem to be very clear on what's going on. Brian Tamaki, when asked about what tomorrow was all about, he was very much, so this is a place of catharsis where people can just empty out and say, what's happened to them, and at least have a place where they can be heard. So when Brian was asked by the media what's it all about, that was his perspective. It's just, we're just hanging out so we can be heard. Whereas the concern is there are other people going along, maybe Brian's followers, but maybe also adjoining groups or adjacent groups who are wanting the government to be tried for crimes against humanity, and they're calling for a snap election. So it seems that maybe some who are going along there, whether they hijack the overall day or not, have very direct desires for what they're going to achieve on the day. And maybe others that are going along there is like, no, the government and talking in our space. And so, I get it, because I do think that protest in Wellington around Christmas time, in January, I think that probably did start by a few honest actors. They may have been misinformed, right? Don't get me twisted, but they were there for the mandates, and that was about it. But very quickly that turned into every other cause under the sun that people wanted to throw at the government. And I know of some people who were there, not personally, but through people who after about 3 or 4 days all left because other things had overtaken what that camp was. So that has happened in Wellington recently. I'm not suggesting that that's going to turn into a big, long protest, but there's nothing to say that whatever Brian Tamaki's ideas are for tomorrow won't just be overtaken by other sources that may turn up in droves, potentially.
Yeah. I mean, it might even develop beyond him, right? Because what he's trying to do is harness some sort of political power or some sort of identifiable, coherent movement out of what was, a really messy, in some ways diverse, messy group of people at the Wellington Parliament. And Brian Tamaki, for a lot of those people, represents a very narrow, very conservative, i.e. not about all these buzzwords like freedom and stuff, and religious. What about all those like feral hippies who are just there because they don't believe doctors and like smoking dope and stuff? That Brian Tamaki can't harness those people. So it either is going to be a nothing burger or, as you say, evolves beyond him.
Hey, here's a question for you, George. And obviously we don't know what's going to happen yet. Think about it being a nothing burger, and then think about being a massive protest. What do each one of those things you think tell us by the end of the day? Like, if it's a nothing burger, is that at the start of this thing petering out? If it's massive, is that the start of this thing continuing on? Or what do you think with each of those scenarios that may happen? Any ideas?
Maybe it's failure can tell us more about what I was talking about with Brian Tamaki's capacity to harness to form a movement. that's a bit bigger than just a church-based one.
Mm.
But I still unfortunately think there's enough discontent, enough, that word that we keep going on about, disinformation, around to I don't see a repeat of the occupation though.
No. In fact, I think we're going to show a clip now, or maybe it's from a different clip, where the reporter who spoke to perhaps Newshub tonight was there in January, and she says it's actually quite ominous feeling in Wellington at the moment, because what they've done the opposite. Like last time they weren't organized enough, the police, and now it feels like they're overly organized. Like the bollards are already up, the defenses are already there, and it kind of makes it feel a bit scarier and more serious. So I think possibly if anyone turned up and tried to do anything, that would be a time that perhaps you would hope appropriate, but levels of force might be used to stop things from happening.
Yeah, and the news media inevitably plays a part here, not a malicious one. Well, not always, but in sort of, you might say that their reporting almost precedes the event, right? Almost produces it in a certain
Yeah.
sort of way, especially in how we view it. And I really do believe that some of the media will be frothing, sort of a bit excited and anxious about what could happen.
Yeah, and I think that's the truth. I mean, I've produced things in my past where I've actively tried not to leave blood on the floor, and if I'm honest with you, they've failed to gain an audience. And what I discovered when I did some of those things was I was like, so the viewing public wants blood on the floor in lots of instances. They really want a biased perspective that they can get their teeth into rather than a fair perspective. And I think the media in this day and age, who are clambering for eyes and clicks and that kind of stuff, they will see this as a massively monetizable, an opportunity for one of the networks, and probably TVNZ, just because it's bigger, will win, and one will have fewer viewers. And and I think what we saw last time, and we're going to talk about this in a second, is the independent media really blew up last time around. The Counter Spins and the Chantelle Bakers and those kind of people still blew up because they were in the village giving out information. And then that's one of the main things where the disinformation kind of was all fomented and then exploded. That was the fuel being poured on the fire, was the independent people spreading those conspiracies out there. So yeah, it'll be interesting this time around to see if the independents are bigger than the mainstream, because at the last one, the independent blew the mainstream out of the water. Independent meaning just people with their phones and their own shows, and the people who were there, they were much bigger than the mainstream. That'll actually be an interesting metric at the end of the day to see where most of the news is coming out of. Is it going to be back into the mainstream reported on, or is it going to be within the groups, pushing out? I wonder. Let's have a look what Tiger's said. I don't think you should do this, Tiger, but Tiger obviously is in Wellington. I've got a stomach bug at the moment. I should head into town and do a bit of coughing around the protesters and see how well their anti-mask status holds up. Politikiwi, based on watching some of those footages. It is a clowns against clowns sort of protest with those wigs. It was the anti-protesters, and I guess the political people. Lots and lots of people saying go Laura. So thanks for joining us, Laura.
Yeah,
we do appreciate that.
It's awesome. It sort of reminded me, my first protest I ever went to was a counter protest against Destiny Church.
Oh, was it the Enough is Enough when they were all dressed in their black and in Wellington?
Yeah, because they used to
that.
use Wellington High School on Sunday, and we protested against them, but also Wellington High School, our school, for renting out its rooms to Destiny Church, especially when the school was so big on diversity and all that sort of jazz.
Hey, let's just have another look at we played 90 seconds of the project. Let's play a bit more of the project. This is the kind of end of the interview. I want to play this because I want to get your take, George. And people, remember, if you're watching us online somewhere, you can participate by sending us a chat. I want to play for you the end of this clip where Paddy Gower and some of the hosts kind of have a bit of interaction around, should these guys even be having this protest? And there's kind of two sides to this. I'll let them play it out and then we can have a bit of a chat about it. So this starts with Paddy Gower. Oh, sorry.
Brian Tamaki, stay away. Keep your people away. You vandalised Parliament last time. They burnt down a playground. People threw bricks at the police that are meant to keep us safe. Please stay away.
Can I say, this is an easy group to mock and to despise, frankly, but they haven't done anything wrong yet. People are allowed to protest in New Zealand. We encourage people to protest if you disagree with something the government's done.
Do you notice Lloyd's body language when he said that? Just watch the body language when Jesse Mulligan says something that's a bit balanced. You watching?
People are allowed to protest in New Zealand. We encourage people to protest. If you disagree with something the government's done, you're allowed to show up at Parliament and say so.
Yeah, and totally. I mean, I worked in Parliament for 10 years. I used to go to see the protesters all the time, and there's a place for it. But this particular protest have wasted their chance at it, Jesse. They had a chance. They wasted it. They showed that...
See, I kind of now struggle a bit because I don't actually agree with Paddy Gower. Like they wasted their chance. When did they waste their chance? Is he saying that the protest in January, that was their chance and you can't do anything again? Ultimately, I think that, public dissent is okay. It's an okay thing in general. I always tend to lean on that side. If I'm going to err on one side, it's towards that side. Now, I have huge concerns. And as I showed you in that TikTok clip, I'm proud how Dunedin stood up to those guys and made a point. But I also don't necessarily think that those guys should have been forced out of the octagon to not say their thing. And I know there can be splitting hairs because there's dangerous messages. I get that, and I'm with you on that. But all I'm saying, if I was to err on the side of either more speech or less speech, I typically, and I'm not going to say always, it would be hypocritical, I typically err on the side of more speech. Do you want to jump in, George, or shall I play a bit more?
Oh, I just really commend Jesse for saying that among a bunch of people who have basically, their job for a large part for the past few months is involved basically, targeting these protesters in Wellington. It sounds like I'm being a bit too sympathetic maybe tonight to the protesters. I always have sort of,
look, this might be a good time to bring up something that was said on Friday night as well. And I think that there is if you look at our episode from Friday night, it's had a lot of coverage. It's about, for us, it's had about 3,000 views. And apparently we got mentioned on Radio New Zealand as Big Hair News. I'm just hearing that tonight for the first time. I didn't know that. But initially, for people who didn't see Friday night's episode, Paula Penfold on Fire and Fury, they wanted to call that documentary The Instigators. That was the original name for it, because it wasn't actually about the people protesting. It was about that level up the top of people who are instigating the protest. It was the guys who are running Counterspin. It's the guys who are running Voices for Freedom. It's Chantelle Baker. It's these people who are sending out the information, not so much about the protesters. And you know this, George. And look, we've got quite a lot of people watching tonight, so some of you won't have heard me say this. But for those of you beautiful people who have been with us almost since day one, you know that I've said this, what I'm about to say right now, which is mostly I feel sorry for the people who are misinformed because they've been given bad information about things like vaccines, right? And actually they've been tricked and fooled into believing something that's not accurate. And I think the best course for those people, as much as you can, is empathy. I mean, yes, you're going to get the odd woman try and lie to your face that her daughter just died of the vaccine, and you're going to give her a lip full back. I concur. Maybe I should have been more empathetic in that moment. But in general, the people at the bottom are the ones that have been fooled by the instigators. So when Jesse says it's easy to, I don't know if he said hate these people, but to maybe mock these people, he's right. And I think as much as we can, we should think about we should think about Brian Tamaki, not Brian Tamaki's congregation. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That would definitely be one of my points. The other point, I will need time to formulate in my head. I've just lost it.
Well, you have a thing, and we'll just play the last couple of ticks of this conversation between the hosts of the project and I.
They are vandals, not all of them, but they show that they are vandals and they should not be allowed back. They're not welcome.
And to your point, Jesse, I would say that threats of violence, which are coming from people related to this group, that is doing something wrong. So hopefully, fingers crossed, none of it will come to fruition.
And I call them vandals. You know, it's not just what they did to the playground, it's what they do with information as well. They're vandals with information, and that makes them even more dangerous than what they do with bricks at cops.
Tomorrow will be an interesting news day, and there's also going to be
That's basically it. And look, I mean, this is why I'm saying it's something for me to... I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, because look, straight away, Freak of the Litter says something very valid. They've threatened to overthrow the government, going a bit beyond protest. Concur, right? But then again, to hold a mock trial because you're trying to make a point, so they can do that. Yeah, look, I'm not trying to play both sides. I'm really genuinely not. I'm just saying, and I'll say it again for the last time, in general, if I'm going to err on a side of more speech or less speech, I typically lean towards more speech. That's what I think. Have you got your thought back, George, there?
Yeah, I guess it's something that I did sort of bring up back in the... Well, I'll bring it up again, but it's really more about the protest and the timeless times, the
lovely people. Well, the time is
the numerous times that we've heard of, heard the elite in the media say things like Paddy's saying that, oh, you had your chance, or you didn't protest properly, or maybe an anti-war protest that is targeted as not in reality or just disinformed, right? When in fact they're labelled not based in reality or disinformed because they're going against the establishment, and the establishment has set the parameters of that reality. I guess I like to think of the politics of it, the power dynamics of it, but obviously with keeping in mind everything that the people in the chat have mentioned in terms of how intense this protest really was, and the stuff beyond the protest.
Yeah, look, I'm reminded as you're talking about a clip that was on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. I can't remember who he was talking to, but it was an American politician, a conservative Republican, and it was about guns. And the American conservative politician was saying, this is not the appropriate time to protest, like after a shooting or whatever. And all Trevor did several times was say, but if not now, when? Like, when is the appropriate time to protest? In other words, if you're not giving us, not that he had to, but he's basically saying, if we don't have permission to protest now, when is the right time to protest? Because every time we seem to want to say something about it, it's not the right time. So when? So yeah, it reminded me of that when you were talking there as well. Ayrton also says, speaking of the body language, check out Jesse's middle finger twitch. And this one, that was hilarious. They both moved away. Yeah, I didn't notice that when I was pre-setting it up, but it was a very obvious kind of, wasn't it? Very obvious. Hey, let's continue on this kind of vein of conversation, because we will. I like I said earlier, if you're just joining us and you missed this, I'd heard the name Chantelle Baker before, but I didn't really know who she was. I'd never seen any of her content, and it wasn't really until Paula Penfold's documentary that I started to look more deeply into it. And last week she was on Sean Plunkett's show. In fact, Plunkett offered her a job because he wants her following. But what's happened recently is her following is dropped and diminished significantly because she's just been removed from Facebook. Let's just have a quick look at a comment she said about it on her Instagram, and then we will have a look at, actually, to his credit, Sean Plunkett in a second interview correcting her.
Lovely people. Well, the time has finally come. We thought that this would happen. It was almost just a matter of when they were going to push it. Stuff News this week did about 10 days ago, I believe, did a really big hit piece on me and really targeted me and tried.
Should we like deconstruct it as we go and define what it means? Hit piece means basically piece I don't agree with. That's not complimentary of me. Right? Just so we know, that's what in this world, hit piece means stuff contrary to what I've been saying. Right. So that's what that word means, just out of interest.
Tried to align me alongside some pretty out there words that other people had said. And what they did is they complained. They not only wrote all these hit pieces about me that included content that was completely false and fabricated, they also wrote a piece saying that they weren't going to ask anyone's opinion, including mine, on our thoughts about what they'd written. So I
always think as well, where could this lead, right? So just think about what's been said, that there was an opinion piece or a journalistic piece written, and it was about Chantelle Baker, and Chantelle Baker wasn't asked about it. Now, if Chantelle Baker ever does a piece of commentary about a person or a group and doesn't ask them about it, then she's being a hypocrite. Like, I guess what I'm saying is there will be a time, maybe very shortly, that she will do a piece of commentary about someone else that she won't ask their permission or ask their opinion of. So just remember these things when they come up. Because what I like to do is go, this is the standard you are setting for yourself. Stuff has written a piece about me. They should contact me and ask me about it. So what she's saying is when I write or talk about a piece, I will contact them and talk to them about it. Now, I suspect that won't happen, but just for us to remember when that does happen.
They weren't going to do their job or their due diligence when it came to their piece about us. Now, moving on from that, a couple of days later, they actually did another follow-up article where it said that they had written to Meta, who is Facebook, and officially asked them about my page and effectively complained about my page. Now, that is directly anti-competitive behaviour. So I wonder what the Commerce Commission is going to say about that.
All right. Be careful with these. Be careful with these words. As soon as someone says that's effectively complaining about my page, what that means is they didn't complain about the page, but they brought her page to the attention of Facebook. So she got to go back on the platform today, or yesterday, whenever it was. No, I guess it is today, after getting banned from Facebook. And it was Sean Plunkett who corrected her fake news.
Okay, now you have suggested, have you not, Chantelle, that your removal from Facebook was the result of a campaign or a complaint or petition from staff?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it's directly correlated. Yeah.
Careful.
Directly correlated.
But I believe, I believe means there are my beliefs. That's not I have evidence for. And actually, Sean Plunkett's about to give her, I guess we could call it evidence. He's done some research and spoken to the people from staff.
Okay, I'm here this morning. I hate to do this because I've been doing some journalism stuff to tell you that it isn't.
Okay.
Because I have directly talked to very, very senior people and stuff, and they have said that apart from the journalistic inquiry, which itself was couched in negative terms towards you, apart from the journalistic inquiry that they made to the management of Facebook, they did not lodge a complaint against you, report your account, or do anything else.
Yeah, but as you said, though, the way that they approached Meta was in negative terms. And back in January, Paula Penfold, the direct journalist who did contact Meta, wrote an op-ed talking about how she'd become misanthropic towards people who were unvaccinated in New Zealand. This was in January the 9th, I believe. And misanthropic means she's a hatred towards people who are unvaccinated. So I would definitely like to see what stuff had written. As I mentioned, they wrote that piece to Meta, they got a reply, and then my account was banned, having no previous anything against it for 7 months. So you can say that they didn't do a full complaint against me.
Okay, what I'm going to do in the interest of transparency, I'm going to read you the exchange I had, because when you made that claim on Sunday, I thought, wow, that would be, as a journalist, participating in a social media witch hunt like that. And I'm not going to disagree with you that they have basically fanned the fire and gathered the mob together and handed out the pitchforks.
Well, I think it's more than that. I think it's even more than that, because you can say gathered the fire.
So this is that example of
because they created this narrative that I was pro-violence.
It's like a cognitive bias. She's been told that wasn't the case, but she's found a different path to get to the same answer with it's all stuff's fault. It's all stuff's fault. No matter how I get there, it's all stuff's fault. I think we'll leave it there. I mean, Sean Plunkett goes on to read out the actual text messages that he had with the CEO who said no. Because the other thing that happened is Sean Plunkett actually jumped on top of this on the first night, maybe in the weekend, talking about stuff had made a complaint. And in his Twitter feed, which I don't have to bring up, but there was a lot of people going, actually, Sean, I complained about her page. And other people went, actually, Sean, I complained about her page. And then other people going, actually, Sean, don't give Stuff the credit for getting her page to take down. We all complained about her page. So it seems that actually the information that Chantelle Baker gave out on that first night, accusing staff of doing it, was wrong. Some might actually say defamatory. I wouldn't necessarily, because it's not such a big deal, but some might say. So that was wrong. And she had 97,000 followers on Facebook, which is huge. And it will be interesting to see what happens from here on in with these groups that have got to be, because see, the thing is, in the world, in media in the world, things go hot and cold. Yeah. Now, will this particular person pick up the heat again and build up other social medias, or is that the end of the heat? Because there was definitely heat around the Wellington protest, without question. It'll be interesting to see if that heat can be recaptured, regathered, or if that's sort of the beginning of the end, literally just being kicked off Facebook.
Yeah, and you know that, I mean, her claims that stuff doesn't ask her for comment are probably untrue if they're going out of their way to constantly approach these big multinational platforms for comments for a fucking story on Chantelle Baker.
Well, they certainly didn't ask her for comment about the documentary. They said that very clearly, but they've given their reasons why as well.
Yeah. I mean, asking social media companies for comment on specific profiles that do have problems with them does often end up in the social media company being like, oh, shit, okay. And then they probably look at their system and realize all these other people have been complaining about it. So stuff in their inquiry, you know, the Meta's right to reply does have its, is a sort of, I guess, indirect mechanism that is sort of, you know, triggering her eventual banning, but it's definitely not how they've described it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if stuff was like, you know, we want to find out about this person's disinformation, that may red flag that. But I guess what a lot of people were saying, a lot of just, you know, members of the public were saying was, if it's been red flagged, hundreds of us have red flagged it. So it's difficult to think that Facebook wouldn't have known about it, but it is possible to think that once Facebook heard from New Zealand's largest news media outlet, because Stuff is number one, that didn't add some urgency to them getting that sorted out. It would be interesting to see what Stuff actually asked them about and what they actually said, because, you know, yeah, and I'm not conspiracy theorying this myself, but it's certainly interesting that her account got shut down just after Fire and Fury and just before the next Wellington protest. You can see how somebody might read into that, and they might read into that because there's a reason that happened at that time. There might not be, but there also might be.
Yeah, I think that it certainly seems like the seriousness of the mosque attacks in Christchurch, for example, has sort of meant that there's more communication between, you know, the meta gods and whichever concerned body in New Zealand over stuff like this. But it seems to have been focused around anti-vax stuff. I guess that's because that's the thing at the moment. That's the disinformation and hate at the moment is around that stuff.
It's also interesting. What did they call it? Agenda surfing in the documentary. That, because like people are still complaining about, people who still ever talk to me about mandates, if I engage, which is not very often, but if I engage, I typically say, what mandates? Because basically, you know, nursing is still there. The armed services are still there, but I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings. Nursing in the medical situation, there's always been requirements for some vaccines. This is not a new thing, as it has been in the armed services. But teachers don't have that requirement anymore. I don't know if many other places really do. So those people who got heat, who found some heat during that sort of, you know, January, February, March dissension, are now agenda surfing, and you're finding a group of them, you know, talking about Roe versus Wade, and a group of them talking about, you know, biology around women, and they're all kind of shopping. I remember being told, actually, now you can Google this if you want, George, to see how wrong I am. So what I'm giving you is secondhand information, but it was from someone who was fairly reputable, that Greenpeace needs to have some kind of emergency every 90 days to be able to do a campaign to be able to fund Greenpeace. Now, I don't know if that's the exact number, right? But obviously, so for example, Family First is a good example. They grift like nothing else when they get an opportunity to get into the media. They look for things to blow up and make a big deal of, so they can send out information to their punters, give us money, give us money, give us money, give us money. Yeah. These people who got some kind of profile or some kind of, they got a bit hot during that time, many of them have started to fade away and go away. And so they need more things to keep that heat, to keep if they are making money off it, to keep the money coming in, or if they just want profile, to keep the profile up. And yeah, the documentary referred to it as agenda surfing. And it's interesting to see where they're all sort of popping up. And a lot of the places they're popping up are those same places that alt-right concerns are voicing in America. They're all those sorts of places that they happen to be popping up. So when people talk about you can't identify all these people as alt-right, I think that's fair to say that about the group at the bottom. But the ones at the top, if that's not the case, it is very strange how so many of their talking points fit perfectly in with those alt-right statements coming out of, the American alt-right situation, and the Bannons of this world and the Tucker Carlsons of this world. And, they fit in there so well. So if they're not alt-right, the people at the top, why is there so much of their rhetoric the same? Unless they're grifters. It could be that they're grifters, which means they don't actually believe it. They're just finding and they're pressing that button that works to get the cash register ringing. But they seem to be speaking the alt-right language. If they're not alt-right, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that not just the documentary, but the sort of surrounding reporting has done, is that it hasn't made the sort of hysterical mistake that Americans might and say, oh, it's the Russians that are doing this or stuff like that. It very clearly and correctly shows that there's a very American flavor of, as you put it, agenda surfing among these groups of people. And from what I've seen, the documentary did a good job of that.
Yeah. Comment here about social media. There used to be a Mad magazine and had spy versus spy. It was like good cop, bad cop, yes, no, sort of thing. People on social media are ego driven. Well, that means everyone's ego driven, I guess. I'm sure there are plenty of nutters that probably need banned, but I don't think it realistically achieves anything. You can't force people to agree on things. I think some banning does achieve some things because it removes someone from that ecosystem. I mean, Chantelle Baker, there's now 97,000 people who won't be getting that input from her on Facebook. Now, there might be a small percentage of them. I don't know if she's got 15,000 or something on let me just turn this down in case it goes on again. What has she got on Insta? Insta, she's got 16,000, but that's a long way from 90. YouTube, she's got 3,000. So actually, even though I do say, I typically lean towards more speech than less speech, getting someone off a platform, I think, does achieve something. It stops that message going to a huge group of people. Because the thing that we have to remember is, if 97,000 people follow her on Facebook and 16,000 people follow her on Instagram, there are a ton of people who only follow her on Facebook. So that's what it does achieve. It stops the dis and misinformation going to those people in that moment. It can't stop those people from agreeing with something else, but it can stop. Remember they talked about the Aotearoa disinformation 7 people sending out like 90% of the disinformation in the country. I don't actually know if she was one of them, but yeah, so I think what it can achieve is slowing down disinformation being disseminated to the public. That's what it can do.
Yeah,
Can't change people's minds, but it can slow it down.
And what is very, as you are, Pat, conflicted about deplatforming or whatever we want to call it, and and probably repeating myself, but it's also an interesting question. Like, I think these sorts of things, deplatforming and that kind of thing, raise larger questions about the nature of discourse and political discourse, and how we talk to each other about politics or whatever it might be, and that we have to use these platforms run by private companies to carry out that conversation, that discourse. it raises these more interesting questions about who has the power to do deplatform. We didn't decide that she needed to be deplatformed. I mean, it sounds like there was a sort of grassroots campaign of people reporting her and that sort of thing. And, you know, that's a sort of example of how we maybe do have a say in this era of what they call platform capitalism, where there's these, you know, large companies that do control basically the town centre, or, you know, where the public sort of sphere where we're meant to be talking to each other. But yeah, that's always what interests me.
I feel like just jumping off the conversation, because I don't necessarily want to talk about Chantelle Baker anymore, but I do want to talk about complaining about people. I'm an admin in a couple of pretty big Facebook pages. I'm not an admin with any power, because what I need to be an admin for is to, like, for example, these videos get shown on some Facebook pages, and if they're not my Facebook page, I need to be an admin in the page to have access to be able to do that. And so I'm not an admin in any of these other pages to do anything, but that means I get to see everything that the admins see. And I'm just looking at my phone right now. Some of the things that people complain about and identify and stuff as hate speech, you would be shocked at. I can't read it out because that would possibly then identify what page it is. But long story short, there is a message here about KFC being open for 5 weeks. Nothing in there whatsoever other than this KFC being open and come in and get free chips and a drink. And that's been identified by someone in one of these groups as hate speech. So, not to defend against, you know, any banning of Chantelle Baker or anything, but I am also aware that lots of people complain sometimes about things that don't warrant complaining as well. So that's the other side of this conversation, that if it was just about people removing people off platforms or deplatforming them, there are going to be lots of times that happens where maybe it's not warranted. So yeah, I'm conflicted but one of the reasons I'm conflicted is I'm not impacted by contrary speech, right? Personally, I mean, me personally, I'm not impacted by hate speech. I'm not impacted by people being mean or nasty to me. That doesn't impact me. But I also am cognizant enough to know that for other people, it can be incredibly damaging. So my conflict is like, I'm fine with it. But what if someone else who's far more vulnerable and a little less robust than me, you know, it really impacts them negatively and it does something that actually damages them. So I even though I say I'm typically for more speech than less, I also understand, you know, one of the reasons that a bunch of these people are anti, for example, the vaccine, is because of all the disinformation that's out there. It would have been better for our society not to have that misinformation out there. But I'm also typically someone who leans into free speech. So that's the conflict, isn't it? When something's actually impacting, that impacts society and impacts people, but people still want to scream, you know, they've got the right to have their opinion. So I don't think there's an easy answer is probably my answer to that overall conversation. And I'm not quite sure where to go with it, because I'm not, if you've heard us for the last 20 minutes, I'm not in it, at least. I don't think George is celebrating Chantelle being, I want to say Chantelle, but it's an A, so Chantelle. I don't think either of us have celebrated her being removed from Facebook. We've just done this piece observing this is what has happened. Because there is that adage as well about, you know, if someone finds something we do abhorrent and gets enough people behind them, we could be next. But I'm not doing that in a way to support the views. So it's you know what the Americans say? The Americans say, I abhor your speech and what you're saying, but I'll fight for your right to say it. I kind of understand that, but I don't necessarily want to fight for the right for people to give out information that's going to harm other people. So there is a balancing. There is
like you don't automatically fight for Chantelle Baker's right to spread disinformation, right? I guess as we you can draw the line. Yeah.
And I guess Facebook as a private entity, not to say yay the massive corporation, has a right to kick, like we said this on Friday night. There was a little bit of discontent in the chat about us removing comments, which we weren't actually doing. There is
the AI does it.
I have a
the
very
other thing about all this.
Well, I have a very strong filter on the YouTube channel, and one of the reasons I have a strong filter is eventually I'm going to change it to members only chat. That will happen. But until I go to members only chat, we can get spammed and stuff. So I've got the hardest filter, the most severe filter on. I've had a look at some of the comments over the weekend, actually, some of the stuff that were held. And to be honest, most of them are pretty minor. There's nothing particularly scary or bad in them. But people were saying that, we were removing stuff and I had to stop and explain we're not doing that. But the reality is, if I wanted to boot any one of you right now and ban you from this, I could. Because this is my show. I do whatever I want. This is not a democracy, Well, it kind of is between me, George, and Tui, but in general, it's not a democracy. We could do what we want when we want to. Now, that's not our style. So what I guess I'm saying is, when somebody owns something, in this case, we're talking about owning the show, we have the rights to do whatever we want to it, whether it's fair or not, whether it's hypocritical or not. We can still do it. And Facebook and Twitter, and they're private companies, they can set their rules, and they can either abide by their rules or they can break their own rules and ban someone for no other reason, because it's a private entity. In America in particular, free speech and those kinds of conversations typically are only valid when you're talking about government's restriction of it, not a private company's restriction. So
exactly,
that just goes with it.
Yeah, which is why the American conceptualization is lacking. That's what I was saying before, is that we can start to raise these questions about how these mega corporations are the be-all and end-all of speech. I'd say to David's question here, does that freedom extend to death threats? I mean,
there's already
death
laws
threats
about
are
that.
a crime. There's
already a
laws.
crime.
We've sort of got together and decided, no, you can't do that. I mean, it's the same with some hate speech laws.
Yeah, it's already a crime.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the point. I mean, it's a crime to threaten to kill someone. So, I mean, I know people are talking about getting death threats and stuff, like, especially we talked to the Disinformation Project last week and that sort of thing was happening. Paula never confirmed she was getting death threats, but she is currently not, well, at that point she wasn't in, and she talked about this on the show, so I can repeat it without fear of revealing something. She wasn't in her home, and she said she is unable to go back to home for some time because of the melee around her for putting out a documentary. So much for all the peace and love, Freedom Village. People currently can't go back to their homes because they've put out information. All the people who are screaming, we just want to view our thoughts, when someone else views their thoughts, you send them death threats. Come on. Again, it's like people are saying, this is what we want. We want the right to reply. We want the right of this. We want the right of being able to share our views. When someone else does it, they don't want to give them that right. It's your classic hypocrisy of, give to everybody else what you want for yourself. And look, I've said it before, not to do a little advert for us, but I was just thinking, I've been in contact with Chantelle Baker, and we actually had a conversation on Facebook, which I'm assuming now has disappeared, about maybe catching up and maybe having a conversation for, no, it's still there. Oh, maybe that means that she's still got Messenger. Maybe. Anyway, I've emailed her. And I would talk to her. And I know that I've had this conversation with a guy called James Hake before, and I know that Chewy was a little bit uncomfortable about me having that conversation with him, because he was a far-right lunatic out of America with some incredibly horrible, misogynistic, sexist, racist views. But we had the conversation, and it's okay to have these conversations, because typically someone will reveal who they are if you give them enough rope. Not to use that metaphor now, that's probably an appropriate metaphor to use around all these sorts of conversations, if you give them enough space. So, I mean, whether that happens or not, I don't know, but I would give Chantelle an hour to talk, and I'd host her, because I'd be interested. Because even with people like Chantelle and others, there are people I wouldn't, though. You know what? Calvin Alp, I heard him on the platform. I wouldn't give Calvin an hour. He feels far more dangerous to me, in my opinion. Don't know him personally. In my opinion, his views seem far more dangerous and far more violent, and I wouldn't. So there you go. I've drawn a line, and there's my hypocrisy. So, like I said, it's a balancing act. I'm a hypocrite. I accept that. Do you want to say anything else about that, George? I know it's time for us to wrap up, but just because we've advertised it,
for me,
I might just do the last 2 minutes for this story about Gaurav Sharma for people who haven't seen it yet. It's only a 2-minute clip. It's from Newshub tonight. We'll play it for you, so we'll give you an update, because this time tomorrow night, what we will be talking about is, how that guy Gaurav Sharma, he used to be in Labour, he's no longer in Labour. That'll be happening tomorrow afternoon.
Prime Ministerial eye roll to start the 11th day of Labour's saga with Dr. Gaurav Sharma.
If I was the Ombudsman and I heard a meeting characterised in the way that it was inaccurately by Gaurav, I would probably have written that letter too.
Jacinda Ardern responding to the letter the Ombudsman sent on Friday, asking for assurances she and her ministers understand their obligations after Sharma alleged he and fellow MPs were coached how to get around the Official Information Act, the OIA.
So how to talk to somebody without actually having any track record of it so nobody can track it down the road.
Sharma has provided Newshub with the agenda from those Monday, August 8th meetings. It started with light refreshments, a corridor and a Q&A with the PM. At 6 p.m, a dinner break, then politics and social media sessions, finishing with a half-hour panel titled Navigating LLO, that's the Labour Leader's Office, and ministerial officers.
A constituent's personal information was released in an OIA and concern about that. You can imagine that in responding to that, we would talk about where the law takes effect and where it does not. This is information that MPs need to know.
Dr. Sharma has also shared a screenshot from Cabinet Minister Kitty Allen, then Junior Whip, to the Labour caucus, reminding MPs to check before sending correspondence because things are unfolding through the OIA process which are less than desirable.
There's nothing inappropriate with reminding MPs around what is the most appropriate way to deal with a minister who has decision-making rights.
Ardern once again saying Sharma has no smoking gun.
Firstly, the pronunciation of his surname. When did Sharma start going up? I mean, it seems to be a new thing. I have to be honest, I'm a little bit confused by the whole details, but I'll give you what I think they're saying. Right? I think what they're saying is that Labour Party MPs, the management or the bosses or the ninth floor or whatever, want the Labour Party MPs to be careful about what they put through the leader's office, because once it goes through the leader's office, it can be Official Information Act, so people can get access to it. And there was an example they were just talking about when it comes to someone's personal details, like a beneficiary's personal details, and it was a request put through the leader's office. So then when the OIA was done, this person's details were released to the media entity that made the request. It seems to me, and I'm being clear here that I'm not 100%, so maybe we'll continue to find out about this tomorrow, and if you've got a point, you can contact us and tell us what your thoughts are. But it seems to me that what they're saying is when you're dealing with constituents, or when you're dealing with a third party, because the Prime Minister talked a lot today about people in their positions of work, like within the Parliament services, when you're dealing with people who don't need to be in the public eye, be careful how you communicate that through the leader's office. That's what I kind of got from it, although you could argue that that could be a good excuse for something more nefarious going on. Is that how you heard it, George? That sort of, I am genuinely still a bit confused about it, but that's what I'm gleaming at the moment, that Labour's saying, not saying that's correct or fair. I'm just saying I think that's what they're saying, whereas Sharma's saying they're all, bought and sold and they're just trying to hide things from the people.
Yeah. It sounds like Sharma needed to give something to, continue his campaign of being on the telly. And he had this text with really basic sort of, being in Parliament 101, by the way, you can get OIA aid on your official correspondence. As Bradley puts it in the chat, all MPs get coached on this stuff from day one.
Yeah, we talked about that the other night about them wearing two hats. I mean, the accusation that people in the Prime Minister's office wore both hats for the Labour leader and the Labour Party. And I'm like, well, the Prime Minister's office and the leader of the Labour Party. I'm like, yeah, all MP staff will do that. I mean, the leader of the opposition would do that as well. I mean, I'm not actually saying whether it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that that would be common practice. So this is the actual text. Hey team, reminder to have a chat with your ministerial colleagues before sending correspondence. So this is saying to the new MPs. So talk to the people who know, I guess. All correspondence is OIA-able, and if we're being lobbied on issues by colleagues, especially where we haven't had a yarn, things unfolding through OIA process less than desirable. We are a team. You can talk to us directly. Read should talk to us directly before sending letters. I guess what that's saying as well is if there's something that's a little bit sticky or embarrassing or something that we need to figure out before we go to the public with it? Like if there is if we're in the middle of a conversation around something that we haven't quite figured out how we're going to put this out there yet, let's make sure that we have that nailed down before it becomes OIA available, or else what will happen is, fucking whale oil or someone will do an OIA, they'll get a half idea, and then that'll be the next heading for the next 6 weeks that they're doing wrong. So, I mean, I don't know. To be honest with you, it does feel a little bit slimy to me, but I think actually that's how politics works. Yeah, I think that's how politics works. So I think what they're saying is, until we have a fully formed idea, be careful how we communicate, because if it's only a half-formed idea and that gets OIO'd, then what's going to happen is someone in the press or in the opposition is going to make something of it, which may not be the case. So let's just wait till we've got those fully formed ideas. I think that's it now. I think I'm kind of clear on what they're saying. All right. Hey, thank you for your comments and everything else tonight. Thanks for hanging out and being with us. Bradley says, I would expect all parties to advise MPs to act this way. I don't agree with it, but it's not a shocker. It's common practice. Yeah, I think that's the other thing. Maybe what's happened is Dr. Sharma has lifted the curtain a little bit on Parliament practice rather than Labour practice, perhaps. I do notice as well, National's being very quiet about this.
Yeah, they're all
I wonder
bullies.
why. Yeah, I think they're probably all a part of it. Yeah, that's the other thing. You notice it's moved away from the bullying conversation. It almost feels a bit like what Dr. Sharma has found out, that the OIA stuff has got better traction. So I haven't heard much talk all weekend about the bullying accusations, but I have heard quite a bit about the OIA conversation. So maybe that's been a better result for him. It sounds a bit calculating, but I guess I'm just being honest as to what I'm thinking. So we'll see. Now this time tomorrow night. Sorry, you go. Yep.
Politics as usual is when we say that, it's never excusing any behavior as well, right?
No.
I'm just putting that out there for some of the comments. In fact, that's one of my pet peeves, is people saying, "Oh, that's just the way it is." When it's like, well, yeah, and it shouldn't be that way.
I think there's a difference with saying that's just the way it is. That feels a bit kind of like, what can we do? And going, that's the way it is. That's how they operate. Because what we're not doing is saying, that's just the way it is. Oh, well, we're actually saying that's how it operates. And like I just said, feels a bit slimy. Whether it's National or Labour or ACT or anyone else doing it, it feels a bit slimy to me. All right. Just to wrap up, let's finish with this one. Your position on free speech is correct. Free speech protects you from the government, not private corporations. That's the same in the US and most of the Democratic group. Okay, guys. Hey, so tomorrow night, we've got someone else who's going to come on and tell us about the protest. Tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow during the day, will be coming and joining us and giving us a bit of a wrap up of what's going on there. Obviously, we will also cover off on what's happening with Gaurav Sharma. He'll be out of the Labour Party by this time tomorrow night, in my opinion. We'll wait and see. I could be wrong. There is still question about ejecting him from Parliament. I thought that basically what they said, what we were told, was the only way that there'd be a by-election was if he resigned. But I did hear a commentary in the weekend about them ejecting him from Parliament as a possibility. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. I suspect it won't. I suspect that Gaurav Sharma, if not tomorrow night, within the next few days, will be an independent MP in Parliament. That'll be my guess as to what's going to happen. But I'm sure there'll be more we come to talk about as well. George, thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. You're a beautiful man. Thank you for everyone for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for Laura for coming and having a chat about the protest tomorrow. Keep an eye on the news. Keep an eye on Twitter feeds and stuff tomorrow if you want to find out what's happening with the protests. And until we see you tomorrow night.
Or go down there in person.
Or go down there if you're in the Wellington region. Until we see you tomorrow night, stay safe, everybody. Hooroo.